Hi, everyone. Welcome to tonight's mindfulness practice. I am your host, Frank Baird, and I'm all alone today. Vivian is away. Let's see. So each month we have a theme, and this month's theme is Yikes, Anxiety. And tonight we're going to talk about interrupting anxiety loops. Last week there was a question. I mention each week that we try to get to all the questions and we never do, but that we keep track of them and we try to address them either in the coming weeks or the last week of each month is a short practice with Q&A for the topics for the month. We had a question last week. How can we increase the chance of letting issues pass through us rather than keeping it to ruminate on? So that is precisely what we'll be talking about tonight in terms of interrupting anxiety loops. So as they say on YouTube, let's get into it, or let's jump right in, or I don't know, maybe I should watch more YouTube. I watch plenty of YouTube. So here's one of the ideas around anxiety. So anxiety is an emotion, and emotions are action urges. They prepare the body to do something. Anxiety is an unease in the body that acts as an alert that something needs to be done, right? So what anxiety is an alert, and it prepares the body to do something. The challenge is often the what is the doing to do? So the basic doing of anxiety is paying attention, right? So anxiety alerts something's going on. There's an unease in the body. Functional anxiety is designed to get you to pay attention. And by paying attention, depending on what you notice, that can determine the action that needs to be taken. What happens with the brain is this. So action urges precede cognition. The nice thing about emotions is they're a quick alert system that the brain, for all its power and sophistication, is comparatively slow to the body system. So what happens is something like anxiety happens. It's an action urge. It says alert, and it sends a signal to the brain. And then the brain is gathering information and attempting to interpret the message. And here it's also attempting to interpret, I'll say it this way, that anxiety is mostly about danger. So it may not be danger, danger, but that's the function of anxiety, is to make that kind of alert. And one way of thinking of it is anxiety is lower grade fear. You may have heard some people describe fear as fear is in relation to something present, like a bear. And anxiety is in relation to like anticipation or a thought of or a memory of something like a bear. I tend to think of it differently, in part because the brain, again, for all its sophistication, doesn't necessarily know reality from thought. Like if a thought shows up, the brain responds to that thought the same way it does to reality. So I prefer this notion of anxiety is a lower grade fear. And sometimes it's not clear. It's an action urge, but it's not, the urge isn't strong enough, or the message isn't that the danger is clear enough or present enough, so that what anxiety ends up feeling like is, I want to say like this persistent discomfort. And one of the things it does is it promotes thinking loops that I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. So the brain uses information and tends to generalize. The brain is really good at pattern recognition. What that means is the brain will notice something like this, and then in terms of pattern recognition, it'll go, it's kind of like that. So sometimes it's exactly that. Sometimes it's definitely not that. Sometimes it could be that. But what it's doing is it's comparing. And it's making these generalizations because that's a shortcut for the brain to be able to do things more quickly. If it had to figure out each thing as if it was the very first time, each time, that is that's going to really slow things down. And in terms of danger and anxiety and the function of anxiety, that's probably not going to serve us. We're probably not going to last very long. So one of the things that the brain does in this pattern recognition is it recognizes or creates a story using the information. So part of the this is like that is a story, because one of the things the brain will, excuse me, one of the things the brain will hold on to or create are stories, because stories are easier to remember than collections of facts or data. So when the brain is doing the this is like that, there's a story around when I encountered this, or when I encountered that this is like. So the brain is creating a story, and the stories are really helpful. They're really valuable, and they're also a little problematic. Stories are prone to inaccuracy. They're interpretations of phenomena instead of the direct experience of the phenomena. So one of the things that can happen is, let's say there's a sound, and rather than being in direct relationship to the sound, like recognizing the volume of the sound, the wave pattern of the sound, like, so we're not doing that necessarily, but sound comes in wave patterns, and it registers with the ear and then registers with the brain. So sometimes instead of doing that, or let me back up, instead of just doing that, which is direct connection with the phenomena, then there's a story. And the story can be something like, that is the sound of. That can be a statement of fact. So that is the sound of a bird. And I might even know which bird that is, right? I might recognize that. That is all in close direct proximity to the phenomena. And then what happens is I have a judgment about that. Like, I really like that bird, or I compare this bird, its song is pretty, but it's not as pretty as some other songs. And then I don't know about your brain, but once mine starts going, it's just chattering away. So the challenge with pattern recognition is that it's prone to error because it's a shortcut, right? So what it's doing is it's collecting a bunch of stuff, a bunch of data, and then it's kind of dismissing the data that doesn't seem to fit with the pattern or the narrative that's emerging. And sometimes that's kind of irrelevant, right? It doesn't make any substantial difference. And sometimes it makes a huge amount of difference, especially when, say, this story that I have about that. So let's say that the story I have about that bird sound gets constructed in relation to other stories. So if you've got the direct phenomena, and that the most accurate perception is the direct phenomena, and that when you start generalizing, you're going to have more errors. When you start recognizing patterns and start leaving out details, you're going to have more errors. And then when you have stories connected to other stories, you're going to have a lot more errors. And so then what happens is you also get emotions that arise from or prompt these stories. And then what happens is the emotions that often get prompted by the stories, those are real emotions. The problem is they're in relation to a story. So one of the things you might think about, so we'll see how how good a metaphor this is. One of the things I think about is the difference between, say, what we'll call reality and watching a movie. So I can watch a movie and there can be something exciting happening in the movie. There can be love happening in the movie. And maybe I have some emotions arising around the sweetness of that. Or the opposite, right? I have some emotions arising that are like depression because I'm not in a relationship and I want to be in a relationship or whatever, right? But as I'm watching this movie, emotions are coming up and the emotions are real, and I don't always discern that the emotions are in relation to the movie, right? The emotions are real, but what they're in relation to, I won't say isn't real, but it's in relation to like a thought or a memory or this story I have. So then there's a distortion there too, because the emotions being real are all action urges. They're getting the body ready to do something. And what the body's getting ready to do is in relation to phenomena that really is only happening in the head, or in this metaphor, is only happening on the screen. So I say all this because what we're going to do is encourage practices that invite more accurate perception, more direct perception, ways to stay more in connection, direct connection with the phenomena than just the stories. So stories are inevitable, right? There's no way not to have them. Some have suggested like that's the only way we render meaning in our lives. And stories are really part of this pattern recognition shortcut, and it's necessary in our lives. So in none of what I'm saying do I want to suggest that stories are bad. What I want to suggest is that stories are particular things, and they have particular benefits, and they have particular flaws or downsides, and that in terms of mindfulness, the goal is always, how can I have the most accurate perception? That's especially important related to anxiety and anxiety loops, because here's the thing about anxiety. So it's helpful to think of anxiety as disordered anxiety, or I guess the opposite would be ordered anxiety. I think of it as functional anxiety. So anxiety as an emotion, it's useful and it's valuable. Mostly you don't hear people saying that, right? Mostly people will talk about anxiety only in the context of it's a problem. So if it's functional anxiety and it's happening, the problem isn't the anxiety. The problem is whatever it is that's prompting the anxiety. Like with functional anxiety, you should pay attention and take care, whatever that care is. Disordered anxiety is not functional and is not useful. What disordered anxiety does is it exaggerates everything. It distorts everything. I like to think of it as anxiety lies because it exaggerates and distorts. And so the action urge in relation to disordered anxiety is going to be misleading. One of the ways you can explore the difference between functional anxiety and dysfunctional anxiety is this. So the part of the action urge that happens with anxiety is the focusing of attention. So the focusing of attention, the function of the focus of attention is to scan the environment. So this might be the external environment. This might be our internal environment as well. It's to focus attention, right? Everything else that isn't particularly relevant or important or urgent right now gets set aside. And then with that focus of attention, you scan the environment and you look for the thing or things that are prompting the anxiety. here, what happens, I'm going to use the bear in the woods example, right? So here I hear a sound, I'm in the woods, I hear a sound, anxiety focuses my attention, I'm surveying the environment around me, and then I see the bear, right? So now what I know is it's not just a sound that could be anything, I'm looking and it's a bear. The other way anxiety could work is it focuses attention. I look around and what I notice is a friend walking up to me and they stepped on a twig. In either of those cases, what anxiety does is as soon as it serves its function, it dissipates. So it'll dissipate more quickly with my friend because in effect, I'm going, oh, phew, I don't have to worry about that. It doesn't quite dissipate if there's a bear. What it can convert to, though, is fear, which is a higher charge of anxiety. And with that fear, the fear will have my body charged up and ready to do something to survive. I've never run into a bear. You'd think by now, all the years of using this as a metaphor, I would know what you're supposed to do when you see a bear. I think what you're supposed to do is not run, but I don't know. But anxiety will get you prepared to be safe. So with looping, the anxiety looping, it's always a yeah, but. What you'll notice with disordered anxiety is the focus of attention is the anxiety. It's not what's going on in the environment. Let me assess the situation. And if some other action needs to be taken, I know what the action is. With anxiety loops, it's just focusing and focusing on anxiety. It's very chaotic. You can never arrive at a good enough to do because the doing of disordered anxiety is just continuing to pay attention to the disordered doings. It's chaotic, and the focus becomes increasingly, how would I say this? People often have the experience of becoming more and more anxious when focusing on anxiety. So, the skill for interrupting this looping, or I want to say attempting to interrupt the looping, because sometimes we talk about these things and it's like, all you have to do is, and it's not easy. When dysfunctional anxiety is, how shall we say it, in full bloom, it's pretty persuasive. Because like I said earlier in the example, in the metaphor of the movie, right? I'm watching a movie, like let's say I'm watching a horror film. I'm going to be scared. Part of the reason I watch a horror film is to have those emotions and to be scared. So anxiety, when it creates thoughts, when it promotes different kinds of emotions, it doesn't matter whether they're quote unquote real or not. It doesn't matter what they're in relation to. It just keeps churning. The problem is, though, the difference between, say, the bear in the woods or the sound in the woods that requires some attention and could either become fear, like for safety, or could dissipate because I'm reassured by the arrival of a friend, seeing the friend as the source of the sound. With looping anxiety, it's like this thought creates that thought, creates that thought, creates that thought. And then there are all these emotions related to this thought and that thought, and they're always catastrophic. Right? Anxiety is always going, yeah, but it's always catastrophic. So to the extent that we can catch on, one mindful aspect of this is recognizing it for what it is. One is it's anxiety. The next part would be, can I determine whether it's functional anxiety or dysfunctional? If it's functional anxiety, the task would be, how do I pay attention to it? How do I pay attention? Let it do what it's supposed to do. Notice what's going on, and then take whatever the appropriate action is at that point. And if it's dysfunctional anxiety, then how would I stop paying attention to it? How would I interrupt the loop, even if it's just getting started, right? Like it hasn't done a complete loop yet, but I know that's where it's going to go. That's where it's headed. So one of the tricky things about mindfulness is sometimes or often we can recognize something for what it is. And then with mindfulness, we have a choice point. The choice point is do what I'm conditioned to do, or do what I'm in the habit of doing, or do something intentional, do something deliberate. And that's the mindful awareness point. I may or may not have the skill to do the intentional thing or the skillful thing. So here what that would be is I might recognize that this is dysfunctional anxiety. I might recognize that the skillful response to this would be to interrupt it and not be able to interrupt it. I would argue, though, that in terms of development toward being more skillful, start with the mindfulness, and that mindfulness will slow it down maybe only like a nanosecond. Because one of the nice things about mindfulness is often recognizing for something for what it is, in some cases is sufficient to make things different. It's like, oh, that's what that is, right? We're not confused. This is what I mean by more accurate perception. With disordered anxiety, recognizing it as disordered anxiety is likely not to be sufficient to interrupt it. But recognizing it for what it is might allow us to keep it from ramping up too fast or too intensely. Maybe. I want to stress, be kind with yourself if you struggle with anxiety at all. But if you try these practices, because sometimes then what happens is one of the loops of anxiety is like, see, there's no way out. There's no way, that nothing will help. And then because your direct experience in that moment is nothing is helping, it feeds anxiety, and then anxiety continues to do its thing. It successfully recruited you to another loop. So the thing you do in terms of interrupting an anxiety loop, you can do this in any order. So one would be shifting attention. When I think of mindful awareness that this is dysfunctional anxiety, that is a shift of attention, because what I've done is my attention moves from the content or the story that's being told to me to the process, which is, oh, this is anxiety happening. This is anxiety doing this thing. So that's a shift of attention. The other thing you can do is shift attention to like anything other than what anxiety gets you to focus on. So I don't know if you've had this experience with anxiety. It can be this kind of thing where you believe you're thinking through something. And then what happens is you think through all these different aspects. You get to a place where you think you're at a conclusion and you go, I think I've thought that through and the answer is, and then anxiety goes, well, but wait, there's more. Have you considered this? Or what about that? And so you arrive, but you can never arrive because that just starts the next loop. And then sometimes what you'll notice is you're at the same place again. Like this is the third time I just thought that scenario through. I don't need to keep thinking it through, right? If I'm pretty clear and I thought it through, it may be I'm not happy with, say, the conclusion or my options. That's totally different than I need to rethink this again because anxiety, disordered anxiety tells me to. So shifting attention. One of the things is when you recognize it as disordered anxiety, in a way you can tell yourself, I don't need to pay attention to this. I may not know how to pay attention to something else, but I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to give it a try. That's where sometimes people will do things like if they are home alone, or let's say they're in a room alone, they'll go and be with other people because other people can be distracting. Sometimes it can still be irritating because you're still tormented by anxiety, but like being around other people can sometimes interrupt it. Doing something that you know is pretty reliable for either grabbing your attention or holding your attention. I think of the answer for me for everything is ice cream, which is unfortunate because I need some other answers, right? But like if I eat something really tasty and I eat mindfully, that helps shift my attention from all the noise around these stories that anxiety is forcing me to pay attention to something really pleasant like ice cream. They'll do something related to the body that gives them, that feels really pleasant. They'll take a warm bath or a warm shower. I've known people who will take like a cold bath or a cold shower because the change in temperature demands attention and can be helpful in that way. Again, it may not be pleasant. Here, the thing is not about pleasant, it's will it do the trick? So I would love to avoid a cold shower no matter what. And if I had the experience that it would shift my attention, I'll do it. I'll do it. Another thing you can do to interrupt the anxiety loops is reconfigure the body. Emotions get the body prepared to take action, but they also configure it in a certain way, or certain ways, I should say. So one of the things that happens with anxiety is we're often sort of scrunched up. Some people kind of vibrate with anxiety. It has them shaking. Some people get kind of rigid with anxiety. But one of the things that can help, which is also a shift in attention, but it's more than just attention, is reconfigure your body. If what you notice is anxiety has you sitting still, playing over and over and over the miserable stories, stand up, stretch, especially stretching. And some people will do this. They'll go like, that's good motivation to exercise, to go for a walk, go for a bike ride, go for a run, go work out. Because what happens is the moving your body around helps circulate the energy that anxiety is bringing up, but also because you're the one determining the body action. Like part of the, how would I say this? Part of the implication to me moving my body the way I want to instead of the way anxiety is making me, I can feel some mastery in that, and that can ease a bit of the anxiety. So reconfiguring the body eases it by that sense of mastery. It eases it by circulating, changing what's going on in my body, and because there's a shift of attention that has to go with moving my body differently. And then adjusting breathing is usually the most reliable. No, these are all reliable. I'm going to say, I guess I won't say easiest either. I'll just go to adjusting breathing as another way of doing this. What you'll notice, if you can notice, is that when anxiety starts to happen, your breathing becomes different. When there are these chaotic stories going on or lots of different emotions being created, breathing becomes dysregulated. So a couple of things can happen. One is regulate your breathing. That's why sometimes people will say, take some deep breaths. Take some deep, intentional breaths. Sometimes people can't do that. Like sometimes bringing attention to breathing in the presence of anxiety is a really hard thing to do. So for some people, the dysregulated breathing is the first sign that they know they're having an anxiety attack or a panic attack. So for some folks, they need to avoid paying attention to the breathing, or they try to have more controlled breathing and they can't do it. And then anxiety says, see, we're dying. But to the extent that you can adjust or change the breathing, it really helps. Another thing, so this used to happen with people who were struggling with anxiety, who would come to a meditation class, and focusing on breathing, focusing on the breathing was triggering for them. So what we would do instead was like do slow walking meditation, right? So the attention anchor, instead of being the breath, the attention anchor became the feet. And because the feet moved differently than breathing, that really helped. That was a shift in attention. That was reconfiguring the body. And it turns out that adjusted the breathing, because by focusing attention on the slow movement of the feet, the breathing adjusted itself. Or I want to say it stabilized. The breathing was taken back from anxiety. I'm noticing a couple of comments here. One is, ice packs are my best friend while I have anxiety. It grounds me. Yeah. There's a thing in a kind of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And I forget, there are different components to it. One is distress tolerance. I can't remember which category of skill it is. But what people will do is they'll have like a bucket of ice, and they'll put their hands in it, or they'll put their face in it, because ice will do really quickly shifting of your attention and shifting of your body state. What helps with that is, because it's not harmful, like don't do this if you have circulation problems. If you do it though, it's intense sensations that have no negative consequence. And the benefit is the intensity of this situation, of the sensations, like grab your attention, so that while anxiety is going, but what about this? But what about this? The ice is going, yeah, no. Look over here. Let me just check a couple of other comments. I ended up in urgent care and then EF with an abnormal EKG. They conducted blood tests to determine if a heart attack occurred. The primary was supposed to see me within 24 hours, but no response because she thinks it's anxiety. Google is anxiety's best friend when doctors are non-responsive. Google is anxiety's best friend, whether they are or not. I know many people who, even if a doctor says it's this, Google says, and it could, well, Google will give you lots of information, and then anxiety will use that information against you. But that is one of the things, right? So sometimes what happens is when people have anxiety or panic attacks, they think they're having a heart attack. Interesting thing about a heart attack is that if you think about what I was saying about functional anxiety and dysfunctional anxiety, functional anxiety is focusing. People who are having a heart attack have a kind of calmness and focus around that. There's like a knowing that that's what's happening. When you're having an anxiety attack, what happens is that chaotic not knowing is anxiety saying, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, and just trying to keep you scared. So a lot of times what happens is people end up in the ER, and then I don't know if you've heard this. I hate this when people go, it's all in your head. It's like, well, one, it's not all in my head because my heart is beating quickly. I'm breathing rapidly. I'm sweating. That's not all just in my head. But what they mean is it's anxiety. And mostly, right, the idea is like, let me reassure you, it's not a heart attack, it's anxiety. I don't know how much reassurance is it's not a heart attack, it's quote unquote just anxiety. I think another approach needs to happen, which is really appreciating how powerful and disruptive anxiety can be. But I've said a lot tonight. Let's do some practice. And then while we're doing practice, I'll take a look at some more of the comments. So get comfortable. Your eyes can be open or closed. I'm going to provide some guidance during this practice. The encouragement is listen to my voice, notice what's happening. Notice what's happening in relation to either my voice and the suggestions I'm giving you, or just what's going on, what's happening for you in this moment. And as best you can, have a gentle, friendly attitude toward whatever's happening. Make your effort at paying attention be gentle and friendly, as gentle and friendly as you can. And stop if you need to or if you want to. So with that said, let's practice. So I often like to start a practice by taking 3 deep, on-purpose breaths. So why don't you do this at your pace, taking a couple of really deep, on-purpose breaths, slow, deep inhalation, and a slow, full exhalation. This deliberate breathing and deliberately paying attention to the body is one of the ways that we are announcing to our body that we're not just thinking about this stuff, we're going to practice this stuff. And then I like to bring attention to my body and notice if there are any places that feel tense or tight. And if there are, I like to see how much of that I can let go of. The body gets configured around thoughts, emotions, activities. And for now, I'm practicing. So can I let go of anything that's related to anything else I'm not doing right now? Let go of any tension that you can, any tightness that you can. And when the body feels as settled as it can be for now, bring attention to breathing. You might notice how the body breathes on its own. Like you don't have to make it breathe. And for this practice, you don't have to breathe in any particular way. So part of this practice is noticing that the body knows how to do this. I don't have to be in charge of this. Just being with it. You can use breathing as an attention anchor or as a meditation anchor, a place to focus attention, a place to rest attention. And whenever attention wanders off or gets pulled away for any reason by anything, when you notice that attention is somewhere else, gently bring it back to breathing, back to feeling breathing happening. And you might notice thinking happening. You might notice emotions happening. You might notice other body sensations happening. Let those be in the background, with the foreground of attention breathing. Inevitably, attention will get pulled away or wander off. So that's not a problem in terms of practice. What it is an opportunity. So whenever you notice that attention is anywhere else, acknowledge that it was somewhere else, that you didn't intend it to be, and then gently bring it back to breathing. Notice where attention is now. And if it's somewhere else other than breathing, gently bring it back to breathing. This simple practice is at the heart of moving your attention to where you want it to be. The more you do this practice, the stronger becomes your ability to notice where your attention is and to move it if you want or need to move it. So noticing, where's attention now? Maybe it's focused on my voice. Maybe you're thinking about the words I've used. Maybe you're thinking about dinner, or there's a sound happening in your environment and your attention has gone there. In terms of practice, notice, oh, here's where my attention is. And then for now, gently bring it back to breathing. Just feeling, breathing, happening. If you think of shifting your attention as something like lifting weights, each time you move it back to breathing is one iteration of lifting the weight again. Anytime attention goes somewhere else, that's an iteration of lowering the weight. And for now, practicing bringing it back to breathing. Where is attention now? As we near the end of our practice for tonight, if you'd like to express some appreciation or gratitude to yourself for engaging in this practice, you might do that if it fits for you. I think of these practices as very intimate, taking all of our attention and really, really paying attention to our experience moment by moment by moment. So if you'd like to express some gratitude, you might say something to yourself like, "Thanks for hanging out with me," or "I appreciate your attention," or "I'm grateful for your practice." And then to conclude our practice, if your eyes are closed, you might open them, move them around, move your head around, shrug your shoulders, stretch, wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, yawn if you would like. And this will conclude our practice for tonight. We have some time for more comments and questions. I also want to get to some that I see are already here. So one comment is, sometimes it's not that clear with the bear metaphor. At least when the bear is gone, the fear subsides. Yeah, the other thing about the bear metaphor is it's sort of like either present or not present danger. I think about how anxiety will do things like, will I lose my job? Will I have enough money? Will I end up living in my car? Do I have cancer? Right there, it's a lot more complicated and I don't know if subtle is the right word, than the bear. And because the challenge with the bear metaphor is like, yeah, I'm pretty clear there's not a bear here right now. If I'm in the woods, it might be a little different, right? It could be, there could be a bear there, but when I'm in my house, there is no bear. There's a Baird. There's Frank Baird here. But there's no bear. There was another, where did it go? There was another, oh, there's a physical aspect that makes it hard to, there's a typo, it's hard to, something anxiety or heart attack. There was another comment too about the reason we can't just talk our way out of an episode of anxiety is because it's doing this. There's the thought, and the thought feels real. And then there are real emotions in relation to the thought that feels real that we forget is a thought at that moment. And so what we're doing is reacting to the emotions that are real. But again, the thing we're not doing is recognizing these emotions are in relation to something in particular, right? So if I've got a bunch of different emotions happening that have me dysregulated and make me even more vulnerable to anxiety, all of those emotions are real. It's just that what they're in relation to is distorted, exaggerated, and that's mostly, and then our whole body is involved, right? Our whole being is involved, which is why mostly it doesn't work to go, that's just anxiety. That when you can do, that's just anxiety, it means you are stronger than anxiety. That's different than being able to identify it, right? You can still identify it as anxiety, but you can't dismiss it. Or the other thing that sometimes people try to do is argue with it. It's like, you're a liar. But the thing about anxiety is it is so convincing because it creates real emotions. And the real emotions are the tricky part of it. The emotions aren't a lie. It's what they're in relation to that's a lie. So let's see some other comments. Oh, I like this. There are bears in backyards these days. Yeah, in my neighborhood, it's coyotes and every once in a while is it a cougar or mountain lion? I forget, but I think of them both the same, like outside, not inside. Let's see. Journaling helps with anxiety. I get frustrated with the fact that I have the same thoughts over and over. It's like going in loops. Yeah, yeah. That's one of the ways you can sometimes catch yourself experiencing anxiety. So one is it's chaos, and it's hard to sort of get your bearings, get your orientation. The other is, oh, I'm thinking these thoughts again. It's more than I'm just thinking these thoughts, right? That the way I said that doesn't convey the emotional charge that's happening with those thoughts, right? I can have lots of thoughts that are familiar, like most of the things we think we've thought before. And that's not necessarily a problem, but with anxiety, it's not just that they are thoughts. There are all of these emotions that are part of it. The primary emotion is the action urge to do something. And then what makes it dysfunctional is it's chaotic, and there is the only doing that's being done is paying attention to the anxiety. So let me see a couple comments. We have just a few more minutes. There's something about thanking myself for this practice time tonight brought up deep feelings of sadness for the time I have not paid attention to and not cherished for years. When the anxiety clears, the little me can be present and attended to. Yeah, that's really beautifully stated. Um, I think about how most of my life I've taken myself for granted, or worse, I've dismissed things, right? Like dismissed all the little tiny things that really make up my life. So it's one of those things where I use this example a lot, where I can put on a pair of shoes and just like the sensations of my feet in those shoes. And most of my life, it was like, yeah, it's not even worth paying attention to. Like, I knew they were comfortable. I sought them out because they were comfortable, but then I didn't spend time with them, which also means I didn't spend time with the being who was getting to have that experience. And so I think about sometimes starting to express appreciation or gratitude to ourselves can be very poignant, very touching. Let's see. I guess we're out of time. So let me see. What are we in for next week? Somatic practices for easing anxiety. So Vivian will be here. And somatic practices are body-based practices. We live in a culture that's really thought-oriented. I mean, even the way we do things, like in school, there's this mistaken belief that all you have to do is present information and people learn. And people can learn some things, but there are a lot of body practices that make a huge difference. And with anxiety, like some of the things I said earlier about reconfiguring the body, um, somatic practices are specifically focusing on that. So that's what we'll be doing next week. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for your attention and your comments and your questions. Come back next week. We'll do it again. Good night.